So the next step that we're going to be talking about here is the Krebs cycle. So again, let's just do a brief overview of what's happened so far. We've taken in some glucose. We've split that glucose into two pyruvate molecules, which has yielded us NADH and some ATP so far. Before we get into the Krebs cycle, we need to talk about an intermediate step that happens first of all. So pyruvate or pyruvic acid, for you guys, it's synonymous. It's fine. It's going to combine with this thing called coenzyme A, which forms something called acetyl-CoA. Okay, acetyl-CoA is then going to enter the Krebs cycle. So it's not just immediately pyruvic acid, which I said goes to the Krebs cycle, can't just immediately go to the Krebs cycle. You have this intermediate step that happens beforehand. Okay, so there are two other products of this intermediate step. You get a molecule of carbon dioxide, which diffuses into the bloodstream. You get one more molecule of NADH. Remember, that's that electron carrier, which we need for high energy things later on, or the electron transport chain, and that's where it goes. That NADH just goes immediately to the electron transport chain. The other thing to be thinking about here is sort of the location of this reaction. So here's your cytosol. Glycolysis happens in the cytosol. You get this pyruvic acid molecule, which is going to come into the mitochondria. So this is outside the mitochondria, but inside the cell. Remember, this is the cytosol. The pyruvic acid is going to move into the mitochondria. Okay? So this is where the Krebs cycle and that intermediate step are happening, and that's a great test question, by the way. Where does the Krebs cycle take place? So here you have pyruvic acid forming up with this CoA, forming acetyl-CoA, or acetyl coenzyme A. And from this, you wind up with that CO2 molecule, you wind up with that NADH molecule, and this acetyl-CoA moves through the Krebs cycle. And we're going to talk about the Krebs cycle here briefly. So for each molecule of glucose, you get those two pyruvic acid molecules. So this isn't even Krebs cycle yet, that's glycolysis. Then those two things give you two NADH and two acetyl-CoA. So one apiece. I shouldn't say those two things. They give you one apiece. So every glucose molecule gives you two pyruvic acid. Each of those pyruvic acids give you an NADH and an acetyl-CoA. So the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle, I'll probably use them sort of interchangeably because depending on what class I was taking at the time, they were used interchangeably. But that original glucose molecule is further oxidized in the Krebs cycle. Okay, and you wind up with more of those energetic electrons we've been talking about. We've been building those up for a while. We're going to need to use those in this final electron transport step, electron transport chain step. So the net energy yield of the Krebs cycle is 6 molecules of NADH, 2 molecules of FADH2, which is just another electron carrier, just like NADH, and you wind up with 2 molecules of ATP. So this is kind of important. If I were you, I would probably know sort of the net yield of each step. So what do you get out of glycolysis? What do you get out of the Krebs cycle? What do you get out of the electron transport chain? So don't sweat this diagram. Sorry, I should have warned you. But don't worry too much about this diagram. Basically, what it's showing you is that your acetyl-CoA is reacting with citric acid and producing NADH and FADH. All right, so these molecules of NADH and FADH, those are kind of what we want from the glucose. These things are all going to go jammed up. They're filled up with electrons. Those things are going to go to the electron transport chain. All right. Notice here you're also giving off lots of CO2. Hey, guess where the CO2 you exhale comes from? That's right, from this process and from the other processes that you undergo. But again, don't Don't worry about all of these steps. Basically, what I want you to know here is that glycolysis is creating pyruvate. Pyruvate is continuing to be oxidized. Its high energy bonds are continuing to be broken down and producing these guys here, these electron carrier molecules. So in the next lecture, we're going to spend some time talking about the electron transport chain.